Very good evening, and warm welcome to the Buddhist VRS Facebook page. We are going live this evening at our Dhammadana series of lectures, and this whole month we've actually been focusing on the paramitas. And today we are actually going to focus on the ninth paramita, which is on Metta Paramita, the cultivation of loving kindness. And this evening we have with us a very special guest, all the way from Italy. Currently, he's residing in Italy. This Bhante has been here at Buddhist Mahavira. I think he was here last year, early last year, as a layperson, and now he's joining us as a bhikkhu. And we are really privileged to have him here. Let me introduce to you Bhante Dr. Candana, right now, who, as I mentioned, is in Milan, I think, in Italy. Good afternoon, Bhante, and good evening to us here. Uh,
Good to be
can you
here.
hear us? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we meet again. Once previously as a layperson and now as a bhikkhu, and we are very glad for that news. Let me read Bhante's profile, and then you will understand a little bit of his background and where he comes from. Bhante Dr. Candana is a bhikkhu and a student of the Dhamma for over 30 years. While teaching the Dhamma for over 2 decades, Bhante Candana has a doctorate in Buddhist ministry as well as degrees in psychology, marriage, and family counseling, and comparative religions. Bhante Dr. Candana was born in Beirut, Lebanon, to an Armenian family, and during the 17 years Lebanese civil war as a child, he was seriously injured. This near-death experience, with the symptoms of PTSD and physical disabilities incurred, led to the development of a keen interest in his mind to gain a better understanding of life's true purpose. As he later came to appreciate the Four Noble Truths as taught by the Lord Buddha, especially given the constant presence of death, suffering, and impermanence at every corner of his life in Beirut. In 1995, he found his way to the College of Buddhist Studies, where he met the late Venerable Dr. Havanpola Ratnasara, who introduced him to the Theravada Buddhist tradition and became his preceptor, giving him the name Candana. Since then, he has been granted numerous recognitions, including that of Master of Dhamma. It was Venerable Dr. Ratnasara Mahanaikatero who encouraged Venerable Dr. Candana to start teaching the Dhamma over 22 years ago, when he was still an Upasaka or a lay Buddhist. Later, having met Venerable Dr. M. Punnaji Mahatero and Venerable Vimala Ramji Mahatero, both those monks well known to us. Bhante Punnaji was here at Buddhist Mahavira, the late Bhante Punnaji, and Bhante Vimala Ramji also comes to Buddhist Mahavira to have meditation retreats. Strongly established in Bhante Candana the powerful practice of the Brahma Viharas, and especially or specifically via the Metta Bhavana taught by these two esteemed bhikkhus, who became his other two teachers. In addition to his academic and applied background in the Dhamma and Buddhist studies, Bhante Dr. Candana has an extensive working background with patients as a clinical psychologist, having completed his degree and training in psychology and marriage and family therapy. While also being licensed in the state of California, USA. Thus, in addition to being a university professor, Bhante Dr. Candana has worked with undeserved populations as a mental health therapist, specializing in the areas of mindfulness, relationship health, anger management, anxiety, trauma, and PTSD, eating disorders, and domestic violence, while using evidence based interventions inspired by his daily practice of meditation. Currently living in Europe, Bhante Dr. Candana holds meditation retreats both in person and on Zoom, with students from around the world focusing on mindfulness, metta, and vipassana, as well as helping introduce a healthier relational skills to bring happiness in people's lives while reducing their suffering through their increase in understanding. Bhante Dr. Candana has an upcoming book on Buddhist mindfulness and lifestyle, that is being printed by the Buddhist Mahavihara, which will be made freely available for free distribution later this year. To this end, Bhante Chandana is also translating his work into Armenian. So that's a profile of our Bhante Chandana. And Bhante, we would like to invite you to start the Dhamma Desana right now. Sadhu.
Thank you. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami. Welcome. Thank you for the extensive introduction. Thank you for your patience and for this opportunity to discuss the Dhamma, and specifically as it relates to Metta Paramita. The Paramis are quite interesting area of practice. I wouldn't say necessarily study or research. However, they inevitably go hand in hand. At least in the beginning, the studying part is extremely important. However, soon enough, it needs to be transmitted into the lifestyle of the individual, hence it being called a practice in one's life. With metta, we learn to educate the heart. So Metta Paramita itself is an education of the heart. It's all about practice. By the way, as are also the other paramis. So the way I look at the paramis, not just the metta practice, the metta parami, is that they merge upon one into each other. They're very porous. So they are not so well delineated or factored or sectioned off from each other. They very much blend into one another. So I know that the other venerables and other instructors, I understand there were some lay people as well, introducing the paramis, which I appreciate, have covered the other paramis. They also are part and parcel of each other. Now, because my topic that was given to me is metta, I couldn't help but, as I was thinking about this during the week, I couldn't help but to notice that metta was flowing into dana, generosity, the dana parami. And I couldn't help noticing how metta was also flowing into truth or satya parami. Similarly, with panya parami, etc., aditana, all these wonderful things were happening. Because as we look at metta, we look at it, as I mentioned earlier, in the form of a practice. It's a practice. A practice for what? Well, if we ever have looked at the life of Lord Buddha, we see that he was the ultimate teacher, because he would always listen and observe, and then he would give the right antidote. He was a very pragmatic, practical individual. That's why he was also called the perfect physician. In one of my earlier talks, somewhere I mentioned how The Buddha also was the first psychotherapist because he clearly delineated not just physical ailment or physical health, but he also delineated mental health or mental, the illness of the mind. So as a clinical, having a clinical background, I see, that has quite a huge relevance to the work I've done and still do to some extent. So coming back to the antidote that the Buddha gave, that we also see in every single one of the paramis, and specifically here in the metta. So if we look at metta, we can look at it as the antidote to selfishness, to fear, selfishness, fear, anger, jealousy, hatred, delusion, all of which can be encompassed into one word that we use quite often in Pali language, which comes across as dukkha. Now, the word dukkha has been often translated as suffering into English. Yes, it does have elements of suffering, of course. However, the English word that we've used, coined for this, dukkha, falls short. It could also mean unsatisfactoriness, dissatisfaction, stress, tension, this state of uncomfortableness, if you will. Okay. So how is that relevant to you, to your life? We look around us today in the world and we are all affected. Yesterday in my weekly meditation class, I mentioned how the world this is unprecedented when it comes to a level of suffering on a global scale, where everyone is pretty much feeling what others are feeling on the other side of the planet, in their own lives. And this brings us back to the importance of metta as based on feeling. We're all feeling beings, more than just cognitive, thinking, intellectual beings. We're feeling beings. The brain does require quite some time for it to develop, even to become more calcified, more the bone structures around the brain to develop, the tissue. But it's interesting how we respond so well, even before birth, even as fetuses, before we become infants. We respond through feeling. Okay. This brings me to the practice of Metta Bhavana. Remember, Metta Parami is not something, a concept out there that happens to us. It requires work, just like every other Parami. This meditation itself is mind work. Let's remember that. So Metta itself is a gateway to understanding. Understanding of what? Understanding the three declarations, characteristics of nature that the Buddha described at the night of his enlightenment, meaning anicca, or impermanence, dukkha, again, suffering, let's go with suffering, and anatta, which is non-substantiality, there not being an entity independent of other factors. Because the Buddha explained it that everything is causally related. The term he used was paccaya, because of this, conditioned by this, that occurs. So, Metta Bhavana, if we look at it in the form of metta meditation, the practice of loving kindness meditation, we see how the person is giving of oneself generously. You give, which is one of the reasons why I mentioned earlier how metta is very much related with the first parami, the first one, dana, generosity. So they go hand in hand like this. They flow into each other, like milk and water, as the Buddha would say about some of his bhikkhus who lived harmoniously. So in this giving, generously giving of ourselves, of our feeling, we become able to feel what the other person is feeling. So that silver lining between oneself and the other, between you and I and them, that silver lining, that wall starts to slowly, slowly, slowly disintegrate until it's no more. What I'm basically describing is the transition of metta into karuna, which is compassion, and then into mudita, which is altruistic joy, and then eventually into upekkha, which is the equanimous state of the mind, which is very deep. It's an introspective mind that gives us the ability to not be shaken by the various situations that occur in our lives. The mind is unshakable, sorrowless, safe. So all this can happen through metta, which is another reason why the Buddha loved to use metta bhavana as one of his favorite objects of meditation. I used to do breath meditation, anapanasati, for many years, in fact, almost 2 decades, if not more. And then when I was introduced to metta bhavana, in practicing it in the proper way, I was able to actually see what the Buddha is describing in the suttas, what his disciples are, how they're teaching to people, and lo and behold, they're advancing quite quickly, rapidly, to the point where individuals are even attaining arahantship, which is the goal of this path. So we practice metta. And by practicing metta, I need to actually step back just quickly and mention how metta often has been, and I practiced that as well for some time, a practice of a repetition of certain phrases. Yes, the Buddha mentions some phrases in the suttas. How he, for example, mentions radiating metta or loving kindness, or any of the other Brahma viharas, meaning including metta, karuna, mudita, and upekkha. The person is able to radiate, send it out, just like a candle allows its light to be let loose in a certain direction. Similarly, it would go from one corner to the other quarter, rather, to the other quarter, and then the Buddha says, as above, so below, and all across, and then everywhere, like a sphere that's just exploding, radiating. So there's a difference, that's what I'm suggesting here, based on experience and based on the work I've done with students and the impact that I've seen even within the lives of patients when I used to serve as a psychotherapist, where the person not just says, may I be happy, may I be happy, may I be happy, may you be happy, may you be happy, etc., etc. First, the person has to first experience that feeling, a genuine feeling within their hearts of something that they have truthfully experienced in them, in their lives, Somatically. Somatically, it's a fancy word basically for having experienced it in the body, having to do with the body, physical body, that is. I give the example often of there's someone who comes over and asks for money and they deserve it, you think, and you want to give it to them, but you reach into your wallet to give them the money. However, there's nothing. You do not own it. You don't have that money or that piece of gold to give to them. So by repeating to ourselves, may I be happy, may you be happy, may you be happy, trying to conjure up something that doesn't exist, it's similar to us trying to create money in order for us to give to you, to the person. So metta is also very real. It must be real, it must be felt within the person as their own experience of loving kindness at one point or another. Now, from that, we can actually open up to the outside world. Eventually, this is the thing which is going to disintegrate that silver lining that I mentioned briefly earlier, the thing that separates you and I from each other, where your pain becomes my pain, where your joy becomes my joy. And as this separation disappears, which basically, again, I'm describing karuna and mudita, compassion and altruistic joy, then this sense of I, this is mine, this is who I am, that sensibility slowly, slowly diminishes until it is gone. And what we're talking now about is upekkha, which again is a requirement for there to be nibbana in the first place. Another thing I would like to mention is the suttas are, the mention of the Brahma Viharas are so, they're all over the place in the Nikayas. Just the Anguttara Nikaya, for example, has so many references of the benefits of metta as a practice that allows the person to go beyond ignorance, to go beyond the asavas, which are usually translated into English as the taints. I like to use the word defilements, actually contaminants rather, not defilements, to describe how as the person's panya or wisdom is growing through the practice of metta, then the contaminant of sensual lust, and then the contaminant of wanting to become, again, to take on another rebirth, and the contaminant of ignorance, they disappear. Without getting into too much, too deep, too quickly, because I understand and appreciate the time that has been allotted to this very, very important topic of metta, I really have to look at things in a way where it is very tangible, something that is, again, practical. The Buddha didn't care about giving us philosophical tools, things that are not relevant to getting rid of the pain that I'm experiencing now. And looking around us, we see that. We see pain. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and send them my way. However, my attempt here is to kind of quickly jump into the practical aspect of using metta to reduce your pain. So how can metta help me now in my life? There's a lot of despair in the world today, in one's life. I was mentioning yesterday to students how we haven't yet fully appreciated the magnitude of depressive symptoms that are really showing up in people's lives, especially after this coronavirus will be dissipated. This is going to really manifest as a huge problem in the human population. So suppression is not the answer. That's what I'm trying to say. And for this reason, I mentioned earlier how hoping that the other person feels well, although, it's a lovely goal, it's a good intention. However, it needs some level of truth. Hence my mention earlier of the Metta Paramita, or the perfection of loving kindness, has everything to do with the perfection of truth. So it has to be based on truth. Truth of what? Truth of my experience. So this is my invitation for you to look back at your life and to remember a certain instance from your life where things were a lot better, where you were able to smile without having so many conditions laid out before you get to, okay, now I can smile. Now I have enough reasons, I guess, to smile. That's not what I understand as conditional being in this case, because it's a natural manifestation of feeling so good within yourself, so full in this benevolent, in this Brahma Vihara. By the way, Brahma Vihara, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, Brahma is the name of the highest gods in Indian and Buddhist cosmology. And in Buddhist cosmology, the way the Buddha broke it down was basically all these gods, there are no gods that live, permanently. It's just cyclical. When the time's up, boom, they fall back into lower states, unless they've become awakened, unless they've broken through the ignorance, like I mentioned earlier, the asavas, asava of kamasava, or sensual contaminant, bhava asava, which is the wanting to be experiencing something else other than this, which almost 8 billion of us right now are in that mind state where we want this corona, this COVID situation to be gone already. So we're wanting something other than this, which for all intents and purposes can be termed as a natural desire, right? Who wants to be experiencing suffering? But within this suffering itself, my invitation to you is to look at metta as an opportunity to kind of create this oasis of, instead of expecting the world to change in order for me to feel better about myself, about my life. Many times people think that in order for us to feel happy, things have to be perfect. Well, if you've lived on the planet for long enough, you will see that that's never the case. Never. In biology, there is a clear understanding in the natural sciences that life comes out of a struggle, stressful state. And one time a person came to the Buddha and he was complaining as to why we suffer, we die. And the Buddha asked him, my son, were you born? Yes. There you go. If you don't want death if you don't want old age, if you don't want suffering, aging, and death, work on not getting born, basically. But it has much more to do with it than just a statement. Remember, it's a practice. Now, one of the things that 11 things rather that the Buddha mentions as the benefits of metta practice is that well, it's in the Anguttara Nikaya, which is the book of numerical discourses, or the gradual sayings. So the Buddha says, one sleeps well. The person sleeps well, and they wake up in a good mood. They don't have nightmares. They become pleasing to those they come across, both human and non-human. And no, you don't have to believe in devas or other beings. You can look at your dog, your pets around you. They're not human. And they also will look at you differently, including strangers on the bus or on the street, in the grocery store, market. And then other beings will protect you. Even though you might say, oh, that's a nice coincidence that I didn't get hit by the bus as I was crossing. Even though physics laws said that I should have, but something happens and I'm not. Weapons don't harm you, the Buddha says. Of course, every teacher, conscientious teacher, will say, don't go and test this out. We do have stories from the Nikayas and the Suttas where individuals who kept on practicing metta constantly, and there's one incident where a woman who metta is her life, and this woman who is tremendously jealous of her and her husband, while she's in the kitchen, she comes and gets a pot of boiling oil and lifts it and pours it on her, this woman who's practicing metta. At that moment, her heart goes, if I have not a single thought of hatred towards this person who's doing me harm, then let this boiling oil not harm me. It's happening very quickly, but because the person has been practicing metta for such a long time, the suttas tell us that it fell over her like rain, like water, cold water. And then to the point where the woman goes and reaches for another pot of oil that's boiling. I don't know what they're cooking. But then they stop her. So there are these incidents that make us look at metta with a little bit more credibility. But the next one is very important, I think, benefit of metta, and that has to do with the mind becoming collected. And this is a beautiful term that the Buddha coined. It's called Samadhi. Samadhi is not concentration as it has been erroneously translated by translators over 100, 150 years going on. Samadhi is like, I like to think of it like a soccer ball that is left alone in the middle of an open grassy field, all by itself. It's available. So the mind is so collected that it is able to sense everything that is happening in its sphere of awareness. Nothing is escaping, which is a very advanced level of meditation, which metta delivers. So this benefit also is indicating that, which the Buddha lists, by the way. One's complexion, one's facial complexion is serene, also collected. One dies unconfused. So the mind is not in this jittery state. And if one does not penetrate through, and experience nibbana, final nibbana, then the person is able to be reborn in the higher Brahma realms, where their practice can take them to experience and develop further until they experience final nibbana. So I would like to, of course, I've given many talks. Last week I did here in Milan, in Italy. I introduced the Metta Bhavana in detail, step by step, the way I was taught by one of my teachers. And that is a very powerful technique of Metta Bhavana. So I encourage individuals to access that, because this time that we have is not sufficient. Because I would love to address at least a few of the questions. So why is it, I'm going to randomly pick, in Buddhism, we talk about metta. Oh, okay. I'll look at that one first. Why is it so difficult to forgive our enemies when we meet them, even though we have radiated metta to them many times during metta meditation? Aha. Because we haven't completely really experienced the depth of metta towards ourselves. Because there's a hidden agenda, because we want something to be different than what is happening. So in essence, the person is trying to change the outside condition by using metta. So metta is like almost like a baseball bat. In America, we have baseball. So it's like you want to hit this uncomfortable situation, basically force it into transformation, into something that is a lot more pleasing to you. Remember the asava, the bhavasava, where we want to change something that is unpleasant or painful into pleasant. That has everything to do with our own agenda, and metta and your agenda cannot coexist. Sorry. So in a subtle way, what we would be doing in that point is anticipating, okay, I'm waiting. How come my enemy is still angry at me? How come they're not smiling back? Somebody's being demanding again. Somebody has an agenda. The Buddha called them the defilements or the kileshas. I like it, I don't like it, and I don't care. I'm indifferent. These are called the three poisons. And they're very deep. So to give you a tool that might assist in address, because this is a question I've struggled with personally, so it resonates with me. So my suggestion here would be to practice forgiveness meditation of yourself first. See, many people, by mistake, unfortunately, some teachers also, from the start, from the get-go, they instruct the student to practice metta towards their enemies. That's a big no-no in my book. You do not do that, because you might actually cause a lot more pain and suffering within the individual, within the student. So that's unacceptable, the way I understand Metta Bhavana, and also as a clinician. So we have a tremendous responsibility as teachers, specifically teachers of Metta. So we start with someone that we are very close to. Now, again, we need to be careful. It's not a person that we are physically, sexually, in any way attracted to. So for that reason, we use either somebody from the opposite, from the same sex, or somebody that there's no way that we could ever find ourselves being attracted to, period. Somebody who's alive, somebody who's not related to us. But somebody that we respect deeply, deeply means so much. And that's why we call them a spiritual friend. Now, from then on, as long as you're working closely with your teacher, Metta Bhavana teacher, who's also interviewing you, asking questions, looking for certain signs from what you're saying, looking and observing, assessing your demeanor, even from your questions or answers, then they will know if you are ready for the next group of people. These happen to be someone a little bit less close, perhaps family members, and then neutral people, and then eventually, a little bit more of a benign enemy, and then etc. So you see how much of a buffer zone there is before you go into an enemy territory to practice metta on them. So you can actually email me on this further, and I will address it further. I hope that helps at the moment. But I would like to try to answer this one. How do we apply metta in guiding a sick, dying person to attain a good rebirth? Wow. Depending on the person's upbringing, education, what type of an exposure have they had? Like, do they know anything about the Dhamma, Buddhism? Do they know anything about loving kindness? So there's different ways that we can approach this. One could be as simple as, especially if the person is near death, but they are somewhat conscious, so they can be coherent enough to understand cognitively what we're saying, to make sure that the person kind of hears the 5 precepts. So if you could run through the Panchasila, is very important, meaning have them repeat with you. I undertake to take the precept not to kill or harm beings. Have you killed someone? Do you want to kill someone? Are you in a place where you can understand the value, rather, of not harming other beings on purpose? How about not taking what is not given to you, stealing, basically? How about sexual misconduct, cheating on someone, and the person looks at themselves and they have all these tubes in an ER, or trauma patient, all these things. So a person says, of course not. So what you're doing is you're grounding them in the most basic way to make sure that they have a better rebirth, at least as a human being, in a better state. So the surest way to do that, as far as I have come to understand, as a practitioner, as a teacher of the Dhamma, is the 5 precepts. So after the third one is musavada, or having the person go over the importance of not using falsehood in their speech or anger or harsh words. And then finally, the intoxication of the mind. Anything that intoxicates the mind, substances, including digital, Netflix, or binging on things. So that would be one. The other thing is to make sure that the person, yourself, and the person is exposed to constantly smiling. So tapping into their memory, if they are not exposed to dementia or Alzheimer's and they are able to go back into their reservoir of memories, I would invite them to tell you about those wonderful experiences, which is uplifting the mind, the heart. So, and if they don't remember and you've been intimate with them enough that you've heard some of their stories that would put a glimmer in their eyes and red cheeks, then even if they have forgotten it, go ahead and retell them those stories. I personally experienced this with an elderly woman who became my adopted grandmother at a nursing home that I used to go and visit. And I became her adopted grandson. She became my adopted grandmother. And I would go and see her. Meanwhile, her memory was getting worse and worse and worse. Meanwhile, I was actually recording in my head these stories from World War II and, communism in Romania, all these things. And then eventually, when it really got bad, her dementia, I was retelling her these things. That was basically putting her heart in an uplifted state, so that when the moment comes where she has to depart this life, she's going to die, her mind is settled enough to go into a better place, better rebirth, using your words. And also, this is important culturally. Some people think that it's very important to be somber and serious in the room with the person dying. No, please stop them. Please stop them. Always encourage them to even tell jokes, but make sure that there's no negative talk. Oh, I can't believe that is gonna die. I can't. Do you believe what they? No, no negative. No, definitely no gossiping. If you remember anything, let it be something wonderful. In fact, if it's something that they could all, including the person, laugh in that room, so I would address it in such a way. I know we can squeeze in probably a few more questions. In Buddhism, we talk about metta, ceto, vimutti, not ordinary metta. What's the difference? Could you explain, Bhante? Yes. This is very important. This is actually ties into what I was mentioning earlier about metta leading a person directly to nibbana. Now, how does that happen? If we isolate ourselves only with metta practice, only, and we do not penetrate enough, because the practice itself develops, if done correctly and under the instruction of a qualified teacher, eventually the mind begins to trust you well enough to go deeper and deeper and deeper. So metta changes, without your knowing, into karuna, and it changes into, transforms itself into mudita, altruistic joy, and then it transforms itself into upekkha. So the joy factor that was there becomes less and less intense until there's upekkha. Now, upekkha is what we are after, because that is where we have the ability of the mind to be exposed to several factors, both pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, and be able to use wisdom. And this is where insights happen. This is another reason why the Buddha never put a separation between samatha and vipassana. This is only commentarial stuff that we see later, much later. After all, if you look at the Karaniya Metta Sutta, for example, the last verse, the Buddha says, this is Metta Sutta, the Buddha says, if the person doesn't have any more wrong views, is no longer caught by sensuality, and is practicing loving kindness properly, as it takes the person further and further on the path, guess what? That person will never, ever find their way into another womb, any kind of womb. So that person is gone, no longer in the clutches of Mara, no longer in samsara. So that's how, briefly, in a nutshell, I can say a few words about metta, ceto vimutti, because ceto, it's another word for mind, but I also like to incorporate it with the wisdom of the heart. So it's also mind. I know Bhante Punnaji had a wonderful phrase. He used to repeat it to me and said, Akupa ceto vimutti, imperturbable, unshakable serenity, liberation of the mind. And metta delivers this. Don't let any commentary or commentarial work dissuade you, because we go back to the suttas. We don't care that much about commentaries. Commentaries are good when they are needed, about other things. But when it comes to practice, and the Buddha constantly said, always, in order for you to check a statement, always go back to the suttas and then test it through experience. Test it against my words. Put them next to each other. See if they match, if they stand the test, instead of blindly following something. So my invitation to you is, if you try, please do your best, but do it only after you've done some research, some studying, instead of just jumping head over heels into something and then hoping for the best. No, that's not the Dhamma way. So this path is all about wisdom. And that's how we develop the paramis, all of them, including metta. Because metta, as I mentioned earlier, it has everything to do with the other perfections, including wisdom. Including wisdom. And the ability to walk away from wrong views, which often is the thing which holds the person back. And it's also called one of the asavas, the ditthi, contaminant of wrong views. Anything that we hold on to for dear life like this is bound to turn into, this is my thing, whatever it is. And it's even the Dhamma itself can be wrong view if we hold on to it, to us. Similarly with our love, which brings me back to the metta practice. We need to be able to practice generosity of letting go and having the other person share that smile. Sharing that smile. As a layman, whenever I would go and order tea or coffee at the store, the person would ask, would you like something else? And I would just go and say, just your happiness. All those who've been with me would just nod because they've seen me say this. But most importantly, I would be completely blown away with the beauty of the facial expression of the person who just heard you say that to them. Somebody you're not related to, but they've seen someone who cares enough to go a little bit out of what is expected, out of the norm. I didn't have to say that. And I'm not trying to get anything from them. I just want them to be happy. That can be another way of looking at the sharing, the generosity. But it also has a lot to do with letting go of the joy and the smile that you have in your heart. Letting go of that, which is another parami, by the way, the nekamma, or renunciation perfection. So when you are feeling good, please don't just hold on to it. Be generous with your smile. Be generous with your wisdom. The Dhamma is beautiful. The modern day education stress mainly knowledge and skill, not upon morality and humane qualities. As long as this trend continues, it is hard to have a loving and caring world for all. Yes, how about we start with one? Instead of caring for all, not to belittle or minimize the importance of your message. I understand where you're coming from, and it is very pertinent. However, how about we start with the person, number one, meaning the person you see in the mirror every morning when you step outside your room. I've had some of the hardest times in my life convincing people that they deserve to hear a few kind words from themselves. Meaning, giving you a practical tool here. Before you leave your room or your desk, look at the blank screen, dead screen of your phone or a mirror, and say, you know, I don't think you're such a bad person. Or, I love you. Or just, if you're not that verbose, you don't like to use that many words, just a smile. But make sure it's a genuine smile. The kind of smile you personally would like to get from another person. So I know it might sound very simplistic, but believe me, oftentimes things are quite simple. It's just our modern minds, because of how they have become conditioned, that we anticipate things to be a lot more complex, which is another reason why so many people The difference between so many people becoming enlightened at the time of the Buddha, who didn't have any PhDs in the Dhamma, in suttas, they hadn't even read a single sutta. They were actually illiterate, most of them, farmers, things like that. They were becoming arahants, awakened beings. It's our modern way of thinking of no. You're trying to, no, I have to. Use common sense, of course. Critical thinking, of course. However, we overdo it. We neglect to consider the simplicity of things. So the simplicity of you sitting there across from the mirror with you leads the way to open up to another person. Given that example that I shared with you from my own past, and even today, where someone comes in, would I be able to help you with something else? Would you like something else? Yes, just your happiness. Can you utter those words to someone else, someone you don't know? Or do you go immediately, no, I can't say that? So this is an important conversation to have. Otherwise, it will be similar to that first question where the individual was hoping that the enemy would change the outside person, this outside condition, to change first in order for me to feel good about this interaction. So it's very conditional. No. We need to first have the sense of goodness towards me. Can you see your innate goodness? Can you smile to yourself? Can you tell yourself, whatever past I've had, whatever is in front of me, I'm just going to look at myself and I'm going to say, I'm okay. And I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. And moving on from there, it's baby steps in the beginning. And then all of a sudden, wherever you go, you're like that drop of detergent that falls into a bucket of that surface is full of oil. It just opens up. Without knowing, the world around you is changing. All of a sudden, you leave a room, people start to reminisce. Oh, do you remember when she was here, when he was here, this and that? Oh, I wish he would be, or she would be back. No magic is happening from outside. It's what's being generated within your heart on a daily basis. Hence, metta being all about practice. And the practice starts here. Before you want the world to change, please let's change here. It's not some metaphysical new agey thing. No. Test it right now. Or right after this talk is over, just go ahead and look in the mirror and or smile. Just try smiling. Most of us don't know how to do that to ourselves. It's a fake smile. So please admit to your own goodness. You can't all be that bad, but we look at ourselves like that. For some reason, maybe it might have been one person, one caretaker, one important person in our lives that when we were children that said something wrong, and all of a sudden that put a big, nasty smudge on this white sheet of paper that was our life. Starting. And now everything is focused on that blotch of ink in the middle of that page. And we've had many pages, but we go back to that. We focus on that. And I'm saying, why don't we give ourselves the opportunity to flip the page to a new one? This is how briefly I understand the practice of the Dhamma. It's a practice. It's a practice. It's not some, just like a religion that, yes, you do some rituals things, and yes, I'm a Buddhist. No, who cares about that? It's a practice. It's a practice that delivers results in your life immediately. And the practice starts with my relationship with myself first. And then all of a sudden, even my enemies are going to behave differently. I'm going to have a difficulty even calling them enemies at times. Remember those silver linings, those walls that become porous? That's the magic of the Brahma Viharas. That's the power of metta practice. Again, given that the context of today's talk is rather different, it's not so technical. I do have videos on YouTube under my name, Chandana Bhikkhu, Chandana without an H, that do go over step by step on the Metta Bhavana, where you can practice, and you can reach out to me through email as well. So any other questions? I think we're over by 2 minutes, but okay. Is it right that we cannot transfer merits to animals but can radiate metta to animals? How can we help our beloved pet dog or cat upon death to rebirth in the human realm? As Buddhists, is there anything we can do? Your guidance. Well, we can transfer merits to all beings. It is our expectations of things that usually stand in the way of our understanding as what needs to be taking place now. Again, within parentheses, compared to what I want to happen now. Because in the question there, I saw an attachment, a connection, a deep, meaningful one also, I dare to say, between yourself and your pet who's passed away, for example. Well, in this lifetime, that animal was an animal, a being with consciousness, with a heart. That's why you were able to relate and share love. But now they've moved on. So there are different rituals, things like that. Different Buddhist traditions advocate different ones. However, when I must also say this actually before I continue that thought. When we are doing metta bhavana, we never use, remember the spiritual friend I was referring to. In other talks, you see me get deeper into descriptions of it, but the spiritual friend can never be an animal. That happens to be a lower being, because in Buddhist cosmology, again, human beings are here, animals are lower. It doesn't matter how connected you were, this and that. Well, I see them as equal as humans, this and that. That is, again, your own understanding of the relationship, which the Buddha would just shake his head over and say, I'm sorry, but they are on a different realm. So once you do pass a certain threshold where you're able to practice metta so abundantly, so freely, without any colorations, preferential treatments, and your heart is big enough to even envelope your worst enemy as if they're your spiritual friend, then you become able to go ahead and zap the whole entire universe, including fleas and ticks and your dogs who are alive, and now that possibly might even be devas. Yes, above us this time. So it's not like going gradually. A dog or a cat dies and they end up being cats or dogs again. We don't know. The Buddha would know, or individuals with higher psychic abilities and ability to go deep into the jhanas can sometimes see where the person has been reborn. But please don't think that they can only be reborn as an animal or lower or human at the most. No, they can far exceed us sometimes. So there's that. But in either case, you can always transfer merits. But please don't look at the transference of merits as some type of a business transaction. No. Remember the generosity. Parami, dana parami, it's crucial for us to not have business mindedness when we're doing the practice. You know, when the rain falls, it falls everywhere. When the sun shines, it shines everywhere. So let your metta be the same. Don't even think about, I'm transferring the metta now. Just have the thought, when your heart is already flooding, overflooding with metta, wherever your pet is reborn into, they're going to feel it. They're going to feel it. So don't worry about it. Just focus here and then radiate it out. Don't have any secret agendas. Just let it flow. That's my suggestion. Any other, is it possible to practice metta meditation during walking? Absolutely. In fact, that is the next stage. You know, I was mentioning to another class last week, I believe it was last week, that real practice and real progress happens beyond the meditation cushion. Who cares what you're experiencing on the cushion? One of my previous teachers, you would say, why do you come and ask me whether you're progressing in your practice on a retreat, on this nice, well-insulated, beautiful area in the country? You were here for 10 days. Yes, Bhante, do you think I'm really advancing? Go and ask your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your dog, your father, your mother, somebody who lives with you, somebody who interacts with you. They would know much better than I would whether you are progressing or not. Why? Because real advancement in the practice and understanding, remember this practice, the Dhamma, not just Metta, it's all about gaining a better understanding, meaning panya, meaning wisdom. Wisdom. The Buddha used to call the terms yatha bhutam pajanati. The person comes to see, understands how things come to be, how they unfold, how they take shape in the mind, and consequently in the world around, how the world is interpreted. What better way to do that than to carry the metta out, to carry it with you onto the street as you're picking up groceries. There's 2 loaves or 1 loaf of bread on the shelf in the supermarket, and you're going towards that aisle, and then you see someone else reach over and they get it first, and that was the last loaf. Now what happens in you? You go, I should have walked a little bit quicker. Okay, that's one conventional way of looking at it, but what would the metta practitioner do? Oh, I'm here by myself, they're here by themselves, but I live alone. They don't probably they're taking it to for someone else. If this dialogue helps to regenerate metta, go for it. But sometimes you might be surprised that it might be even a lot more serious of a situation. Quickly, there was this, I can relate this story that happened in New York City. I believe it's around 5:30 p.m., busy time in the subways, and a man walks into one of the doors open in the train, and the man walks in and 3 little children walk with him, and the children are running all over the place in the subway. So everybody's on their nerves, they're angry at the children, but especially on the dad, presumably the dad, because the kids are uncontrollable. Finally, meanwhile, the dad is just sitting like completely like a zombie. Finally, he comes to, he wakes up, he collects his children and says, oh, I'm so sorry to everyone. As he's having them huddled in like this, the children suddenly become quiet, and he turns to them, the man, turns to these people who are still angry on their faces, you could see. He says, their mother, my wife, just died. We were in the ER. So I'm taking them to my in-laws so that I can come back. Something like that. Everybody's behavior, mentality, concepts of what the situation was changes immediately. What happened? See? New information was introduced. So my suggestion, when it's really difficult to practice metta, is to introduce some information that would help foster that sense of metta back in your heart. It's hard, it's easier when you're sitting, of course, but it's hard when you're in a dynamic shape. That's why, as meditation instructors, we always insist on there being a shorter duration walking meditation. In some traditions, they insist on the same amount of time, 1 hour sitting, 1 hour walking. I don't do it like that. So for every 1 hour, I usually have about 10 to 15 minutes walking to circulate the blood and the muscles, and to also get you into a quasi-normal state of functioning while you're bringing in the state of mindfulness and awareness, and your object of meditation is with you. So the more you do this, it becomes more natural. So I hope that helps with your question. Do we have time for one more? Or okay.
No, Bhante, I think we are about there. We have already gone to 1 hour 15 minutes. And I think most of the
Yes.
questions have been answered. There are some repetitive questions that were asked. I don't think we'll answer them because I think you've already answered them earlier. So before we end, Bhante, could we now have the Anumodana to the Devas as well as the dearly departed?
Sure. Let's do it. We can do it both in Pali and English if we have the time.
Yeah, of course. It's up to you.
Okay. Let's do the Pali first. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahiddika punyantang anamoditva chirang rakhantu lokasasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahiddika punyantang anamoditva chirang rakhantu desanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahiddika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu mam paranti. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired for the acquisition and achievement of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas, a mighty power share in these merits of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you be well, and please be safe in practice.
Thank you, Bhante. Thank you for an excellent sharing, and also for the Q&A that you just finished. So we've come to the end of this evening's Dhamma sharing with Dr. Candana, Bhante Dr. Candana. So before we end, on behalf of the Committee of Management of the Buddhist Mahavihara, as well as the monks of the Buddhist Mahavihara, we'd like to take this opportunity to thank Bhante Dr. Candana for taking time off from your busy schedule here in Italy. And also, Bhante, please stay safe in Italy. We hear a lot of horror stories with regards to the COVID-19. And also to our sponsors this evening, thank you so much for your sponsorship. And we look forward to seeing each and every one of you again next week, same time. And have a pleasant evening. Sadhu.
Be well.